Hey, congratulations. That's really good.
Awesome. Thank you. Another clap, Silvio.
Yeah. Oh, gonna be on.
Yay. It's one of the downside of being online. You don't get that interaction, but it was a great talk. So I'll introduce our second speaker. So our second speaker tonight is Pete Rankin, who I don't think actually needs any introduction. He's quite familiar to us at CSides and CSides. We actually had someone pull out, so Pete kindly got up and offered to speak at the last minute, which is great for us because he's always doing fun and crazy things all the time. So Pete, in his full-time job, is a researcher at Azimuth Security. He used to work as a software engineer for Pen 10 and the Australian Department of Defence. When he's not working, he's doing weird and wonderful projects or programming CSides Canberra badges, which he's done the 2019 badge and worked on the 2020-2021 badge. And tonight, Pete is going to be talking about modifications he's done to the iPod. So thanks, Pete, for coming and speaking to us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always good to come and give presentations. Let's see if I can get my slides up. That's the real trick. Good.
Yep, looks like it's working.
Okay. Thanks for everyone sticking around to see my talk. It's a bit of a short talk tonight, but hopefully, I think the main takeaway I want to get people is go out and hack something. Just do a modification, change something. Because tonight's talk is on modifying an iPod Classic, but a lot of the things that I show in here can be done to a whole range of other things. So yeah, modifying the iPod. There we go. All right. So Carly kind of gave me an introduction. Again, I work at Azimuth Security. You can always reach out to me if you want to know more. Otherwise, I spend my days basically reversing code. Also do a bunch of development in C and C++. Big fan of retro and Nintendo. And volunteering for B-Sides, I highly recommend it. It's good experience and a good bunch of people. Also, getting involved in the badge and doing some hardware stuff, it's a good way to learn techniques. And we're always looking for people to kind of help out and assist. This is where it all started for me. Back in 2004, I was up in Cairns and I was walking through a shopping center and I saw a display for the 3rd generation iPod Classic, this one right here. And it blew my mind. And I'll explain to you why. Because back then, if you had a CD Discman, maybe you made an MP3 one, but really you had 1 CD's worth of music with you wherever you went. This was a 15 gig one that I ended up buying, which can hold I think 20,000 songs or something like that. But it, just the quick numbers, I can put every CD I ever owned and more on this little box, and I got one and it was amazing. It got me through year 12 in high school and then through uni years. Fantastic little device. But I think the problem is that these days we have access to all these streaming services. So you don't need a big hard drive. You don't need a big music player because you can just stream everything. And it's so much easier. And so it's probably been about 10 years since I've really used an iPod. But that brings it to a question why would you use an iPod in 2020? Well, I think as a security community, the first thing I'll mention is privacy. Now, if you're using a streaming service like Netflix or Spotify, the thing you have to remember is that even if you're paying for those services and you're not seeing ads, that does not mean that they're not collecting data on you and that data is not being sold for advertising, and that the music that you listen to can influence the advertising and things that you are shown in your day-to-day browsing. So if you're concerned about privacy, an iPod with no internet connectivity and no way for it to provide the data back to the internet for tracing your movements or what you like to listen to, could be a good thing for you. So if you're big on privacy and you want to kind of decouple yourself from streaming services, it's a good place to start. Retro. There is a big boom in people taking these old school devices and modifying them. I'm seeing now like people adding high resolution displays to Game Boys. There are people chopping up Wii consoles and putting them into small form factors. There's a whole range of people doing all sorts of projects at the moment. For me, I find it to be a bit of an exciting time to be doing all these modifications because everyone else is coming up with all these cool ideas. So yeah, if you're big on retro and you want to have some classic piece of history that actually works really nicely, it's a good project. And then the third thing is with COVID and a lot of us being locked up, you can only watch so many TV shows, you can't go to the shops, you can't travel. A nice hardware hacking project, even if it's not something you're going to use every day, because I'm definitely not just going to throw away my phone and my streaming services and use my iPod, but it is an excellent learning exercise. It'll teach you better soldering skills. It'll teach you about like searching online and finding other people who are doing similar projects. So even if it's not an iPod, I'm sure there's something out there that you can take and modify and bring some new life to. So, okay, you've decided like me to go crazy and buy an iPod Classic and relive the memories of your high school and uni years. Or maybe that's just me and I'm a bit sad. But there's a couple of things to take into consideration. So I'm not including iPod Nanos or Shuffles or the Touch iPods. And the reason for this is that there's not enough space. There's not a lot of support in replacing hard drives. Maybe you can replace the battery, but if you really want to add things to it and make it better than what it was, an iPod Classic has room inside the case that you can actually do some cool stuff with. And also, within the range of iPod Classics, you've got different generations. So the one I showed you earlier was a 3rd generation iPod. That was the first one released in Australia about 2004. And they go all the way up to generation 7, which is the one that's on this slide in front of you. Now, the generation is important because it will affect the maximum storage that the iPod recognizes. There is a hardware limitation in some generations of iPod that actually prevent it from recognizing larger capacity disks. And so that's an important consideration. The other thing is performance. So newer iPods, which can store more songs, have more RAM. And more RAM in an iPod means that if you're going to load this thing up with like millions of songs, you're going to want more RAM because the whole thing is managed in a database that's loaded into memory on the iPod. And if you don't want it to crash and reboot, you're going to need to maybe pick a later iPod. That being said, if you're only looking to upgrade an iPod to like 256 gigabytes, any generation is probably going to be fine. The other consideration is thickness. So there are actually different generations of iPod that have different thicknesses to the case. And this will affect whether you can put a bigger battery in it, whether you can put like a Bluetooth module in it, those sorts of things. And if you're like me and you ended up buying a thin model one, it's okay. You can buy a replacement back plate and front plate. They're actually a bit thicker. And that's kind of important because if you're like me and you're a Gumby, when you open the iPod, you will actually break these tiny little clips. There are 13 of these little suckers all around the iPod. I've done 2 iPod openings now, and on both times, I've damaged the back, the front, and the clips. So buy yourself a replacement back and a replacement front because these things are hard to open. That being said, they're not as hard to open as the newer iPhones, which are basically welded shut. And the most important point, if you're choosing an iPod, is to pick based on what you want it to be. Maybe you have fond memories of an old iPod video or an iPod photo, and you love the look and feel and design aesthetics of it. If you're only looking to put like, 256 gigs in there, why don't you just mod that one? You don't need to do the latest. You don't need to up it all the way to huge amounts of storage. Do the one that you actually want to have. So, next thing, how much storage do you want to put in it? So there's this wonderful company called iFlash, and they sell a whole bunch of these little PCBs, the thing that's in the middle that's black. And that replaces, essentially, your iPod hard drive. So it has the same iPod connector here, but you can plug SD cards into it. And it's kind of a bit like a RAID system where you put in different size SD cards and it accumulates them into one physical disk. And so you can put like 4 or 1 terabyte cards in there. But an important consideration is that an iPod at most can recognize 2 terabytes of storage. There's a kind of like an integer overflow in the software for an iPod. So if you decide to put in 2 terabytes and 100 meg, it's going to overflow the 2 terabytes and only recognize 100 meg. So 2 terabytes is the most you can make an iPod. Also, hard drives and iPods will die. They will die now, they'll die eventually. You're probably going to buy a second-hand one. Just do yourself a favor and replace it with this. It'll also make your iPod run a lot faster. The original hard drives and the iPods were designed to stop and click when they weren't in use. And then when you want to go to the next song, it would take a while for the hard drive to spin up and go to the next one. These are instantaneous because they're solid state drives. So you'll notice amazing improvements of your iPod. They're also very thin. They're a lot thinner, these iFlash boards, than your traditional iPod hard drives. So you can fit more stuff in there, like a bigger battery or a Bluetooth module. They even have a model of this that will fit an M2 SSD. And you might be thinking like, well, why don't I use an SSD? Well, the thing is that it will draw so much power that you actually need the biggest battery. And they recommend that you only have the device hooked up to power for about 2 hours. Otherwise, it'll basically melt through its case. It'll get that hot. Also, I'm amazed that they now have 1 terabyte micro SD cards. Like, I bought 512s when this came out, and then all of a sudden 1 terabytes came in. So good. Okay, moving on. Battery. So if you decide to put a new battery in your iPod, you can put a replacement one, which is the same size, same battery life as what you had before, or you can put in like mobile phone size 3,000 milliamp hour batteries. And then all of a sudden you have an iPod that you can turn on, start playing music, and leave it on for a week, and it will still be running in a week's time. Like, it is just so much more power than what the iPod was originally designed for. So if you want a device that you can just travel with and never have to plug into a charger, it's kind of cool. Also, the original iPods had lithium-ion batteries in it. And over time, the batteries expand. And at worst case, they can push up against your screen and crack your screen. Or at the worst case scenario, they will explode into fire. So if you're buying a new iPod and you're looking to do these modifications, highly, highly, highly recommend just get a new battery. Okay, so the next thing I did, which is a little bit different because those first 2 things are kind of common things that people do with iPod modification. I'd seen a couple of people like basically replace the dock connector in older generations of iPods with USB-C, but none that had actually made it like run at the same time with a new generation iPod. So the thing to remember about USB-C is that it has built-in legacy support. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this slide, is that to add USB-C to any USB 2 device, you only need to connect 4 wires. That's it. There's no chip, there's no extra hardware. You just have to find the data lines and the power lines, the 4 wires for USB. And if you join those up, it will just work. And if you're trying to figure out where you're going to solder to on the motherboard, to figure out like where am I going to join up the lines on the USB-C PCB, the green thing in the top corner, on the motherboard, what you can do is you can get your little iPod dock cable here, and you can get a little breakout thing for USB, and you can plug those 2 together. Now, what you have here then is if you plug this into your iPod with the motherboard exposed and get a multimeter, you can actually put it on one of these pins and then poke around the motherboard until you find a continuous connection. And that way you can actually buzz out where the USB pins are on the motherboard. You can solder the wires to your USB-C connector and it's done. The hardest part of this mod is actually putting a hole in the case in the right spot. And if you're like me, don't use a hand drill, use a drill press, go to someone's house because you don't have steady hands. I thought I had steady hands. I don't have steady hands, and you'll miss and you'll scratch it as a case. You can kind of see here, this is my, you can see around the edges that I missed quite a few times and scratched it. But other than that, you can have USB-C. And if you do it like this, you can have both the dock connector and the USB-C working at the same time. Now, if you're not looking at doing an iPod Classic mod, okay, cool. But maybe you have a wireless mouse with a USB 2 dongle. Now, if you've been going out and buying a new MacBook, which only has USB-C ports, you have to fit something between the receiver and the laptop. What you could do as a project is actually remove the USB 2 connector on the receiver and just solder on the wires for USB-C, and you've just made a USB-C dongle without any extra hardware. So, Bluetooth. There's an important reason why you might want to add Bluetooth to your iPod, and that is that you will have your favorite pair of Bose Bluetooth headphones, or you have like a Bluetooth speaker that you have in the kitchen, or your car will only have Bluetooth connectivity for music. There are so many things that if you're just relying on a headphone jack, you're going to be limited with an iPod. So you've got extra space in the case. You just have to join up some wires and you can have Bluetooth. So if you buy one of these little Bluetooth receivers, you can actually open it up like I have, and you can pull out the PCB from it and just join a couple of wires to it, and you've got Bluetooth in your iPod. And the other thing is that if you do it this way and you join the headphone wires to the headphone socket but leave it in place, you can have both Bluetooth and a working headphone jack in your iPod. And this is really important because Apple made a big deal a couple of years ago about the courage that they had when they released the iPhone without a headphone jack and how they want to change the market. There is no reason to remove a headphone jack from an iPod. You can have both Bluetooth and a headphone jack working at the same time. And it's kind of funny because an iPod that I've come up with has a USB-C connector and a headphone jack, which makes it have more connectivity than even the new iPhone 12, which is still on a Lightning port connector. Okay, so we've got our Bluetooth board, we've got our USB-C connector, and we've got our iFlash hard drive replacement. And if you put all these things into the case, they're not going to fit straight away. The USB-C connector pushes the iFlash too far forward for a larger battery. The Bluetooth module overlaps with the iFlash board. But what you can do is you can get something like a Dremel or an electric saw kind of thing, and you can actually chop PCBs. If you tape it first and you just take your time, it's virtually impossible to damage the hardware. Like that iFlash card there, I removed 2 SD card slots and cut the wires to them on the PCB with a Dremel, and it worked fine the first time. It's super easy to do. But the Bluetooth module, the first one I did, I actually stuffed up. But what you can do, it's very hard to see here, is that you can actually just run a little tiny wire from where you've cut the tracks. So you can even fix your mistakes if you stuff up. And if you did think that this was hard to do, or that you were worried about cutting tracks, there is a hacking community which is basically taking Wii consoles, taking the motherboard out of them, chopping it up into a space about the size of my hand, and then putting it into Game Boys. Like, it's like chopping a motherboard is not a sin. You can use it to basically fit a whole bunch more stuff in there. But then you have the task of actually wiring the thing up, and this will take time. I think I spent a couple of days putting all these wires in and getting the lengths right. Now, if you go down to somewhere like Jigsaw or you order online, you can get some very, very thin copper wire, and this stuff is coated, so it'll only join where you've soldered it. And you just run little wires to join the things together. Now, at the end of my slides, I've got links to everything that I'm talking about. I should have probably mentioned that at the beginning, but there are links that you can basically take a screenshot and go nuts. So the other thing is that you're going to cut holes in the case, so for the USB-C connector. And also, if you look at the iPod in the picture, I've created a button for the Bluetooth and a switch underneath it, which is next to the blue light. And the cool thing about this is that the iPod headphone jack actually has a pre-drilled hole at the very back of it covered by a sticker. And so if you remove that sticker and you put an LED light at the back, you can actually have the Bluetooth indication light shining out through the headphone socket, which is kind of cool because if you're using wireless headphones, the headphone socket goes blue. But if you plug headphones in, they'll work just fine. So yeah, let's see if I can show you here. Just hold down the button. There we are. So it's blinking away. And turn it off by holding it down. And there's also a switch to change it between receive and transmit. And the reason why I added that switch in is because that's how you remove pairings. So again, iPods like this are incredibly difficult to open. So do yourself a favor, put all the buttons on the Bluetooth receiver on the outside. So when you lose the connection and the pairing, you don't have to open your iPod to reset it. Very important. The other thing to mention is that if you hook the Bluetooth receiver up to the battery inside the iPod, it doesn't even need its own lithium-ion battery. So when you charge the iPod, you're actually charging the Bluetooth receiver because it uses the same battery. So you've done that. It turns on. The next thing you're going to want to do before you close it is you're going to want to sync some music onto it and check everything works. Again, for the third time, these are hard things to open, and I have damaged many, many parts trying to open these iPods before. So get the right tools. You can go onto iFlash's website and they've got a whole bunch of little shimmies and things to open up the iPods. But anyway, the point is here, check your iPod works and everything that you've done works before you close it. Now, when it comes to formatting an iPod, on its first boot, it will actually just format it to, I think, Windows format, and then you can sync it. But if you've added USB-C, you might want to use it as an external hard drive. And if you want to use it as an external hard drive, FAT32, which is an older file system, is not really going to cut it. It has a 4 GB limit. It's prone to failures. Not the best thing for moving files or storing files. So if you use a tool like Linux gparted, you can actually repartition the iPod's hard drive, and you can create a FAT32 partition at the front and whatever you want afterwards. So for me, I added an NTFS pass partition at the end so I can use it like a hard drive. Now, the most important thing is if you're going to do this is when you're formatting FAT32, there's an option to say how big the clusters are for FAT32. And you're going to want to use 64 kilobyte cluster sizes. If you use anything smaller than that, your iPod's going to run really, really slow because it's going to take forever to read all the clusters to play music or to go to the next thing. If you make it larger than 64 clusters, the iPod is going to start to have some defects show, like your cover art's going to skip full chunks of the cover art or the song won't play. Because I believe that there's a bug in the iPod where when you use cluster sizes greater than 64K, it actually overflows and it doesn't read enough data or it skips too far ahead. And so if you actually want to try and create a file system exploit for an iPod, there might be stuff there. Again, your target audience is probably not very big. But then, yeah, you can literally have a massive iPod with all your music on it, Bluetooth, USB-C, and you can do it yourself. It's not that hard. It'll take you time and patience, but that's about it. And if you do need help or you want some suggestions, you can always reach out to me. I've added all the I've added all my contact details here, as well as basically links to the individual things. So there's a YouTube video which kind of talks about adding USB-C to an older iPod, and they talk about basically buzzing around to find the connections. There's a YouTube video there that takes you through the entire process of adding the Bluetooth module. The only thing is that they don't add the switch or the LED light, but I would recommend doing both those things. Otherwise, it's got links for what battery to buy, what iPod to buy, what the limitations are, all your storage options, whether you want to go with a SSD and burn a hole in the ground, do you want to add a gigantic battery into it? But yeah, most importantly, find yourself a project while you're in lockdown and learn some soldering skills and modify some hardware. Thank you very much for your time.
Such a great talk. And I think to me anyway, I think it really epitomizes what hacking is all about. I think actually both talks tonight for me is like the classic definition of hacking and, creativity, ingenuity, targeting some sort of thing. I think it's such great, stuff to see and really inspiring. I think I said this to you last night. It's really inspiring to see this type of stuff, and it makes me want to like immediately jump out and get a soldering iron and do something as cool as that, because it's really nice to see. There was one question, actually sort of more a comment than a question, to be honest, on the Slack. Josh said for USB-C to USB-C cables, if you connected CC1 and CC2 to 5.1K resistors, apparently you'll get USB-C to USB-C. But it's yeah.
So this is a really good point. So I haven't done that. So a USB-C to USB-C cable won't work in my iPod. But also that I didn't know this when I was doing it. It worked with USB 2. So I kind of said, yeah, it works. Like when you do these projects, you're going to miss stuff and you're going to, make mistakes, and it's fine, because it's really cool because if I actually ever build up the courage to open my iPod again, like I might actually go in and fix that. Or maybe someone else will come along and build an even better one. Maybe an iPod with less war scars than my one has from opening and closing it so many times.
I don't think it's a bug. I think it's a feature, USB-C to USB-A. I think that's a feature for sure. What do you
actually didn't think the Dremel looked that bad, actually, or the drill hole for the USB-C output or the USB port looked pretty good.
I also had a video, like a live video, so you could see like all the dust I was breathing in and like the kind of offcuts you do the first time, like you're going to make mistakes, but you can easily fix them with a little bit of wire and a little bit of soldering.
I think I've paid like reasonable money for electronics that look worse than what you did with your iPod, to be honest.
I thought it was quite neat, and the light in the USB, the Bluetooth indicator in the port looks really good too.
Yeah, so if you do these mods, you can actually use whatever color you want. Like you're not limited.
Nice.
Just a sort of a sidetrack question here, out of curiosity, what are your thoughts about USB-C? I mean, it's one connector, lots of cables. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because I don't know.
I got to say, like the different standards for USB-C cables makes it very, very confusing. Like if you're on an actual, like I kind of paid out Apple a couple of times with their Lightning connector, but Lightning connector is a Lightning connector. There's no versions, there's no speeds to it. Like it is what it is basically in the tin. The promise of USB-C was that one cable to rule them all, but at some point they're not going to have those USB 2 lines in the middle of them because it's a legacy feature. And then you have these extra pins that you're not using for anything. So yeah, it was a great idea. And I think over the next, 5-10 years, it'll probably calm down a little bit in terms of the standard, and a USB-C cable will work with everything. That being said, one point I'd make is that I don't see Apple putting a USB-C in their phones anytime soon. However, for those who really want to give themselves a challenge, it wouldn't be too bad to actually crack open an iPhone, grab a a Lightning to USB-C cable, take the chip out of it, and see if you can actually make a USB-C iPhone before Apple does. Like, there's a challenge for the audience.
We'll leave that one to you, Pete.
A C-sides or a B-sides talk next year, perhaps.
Awesome.
Okay.